Why do some patterns feel like they have a gravitational pull? You know they are not helping you. You may even hate them. And yet they keep returning. The same overthinking, the same avoidance, the same late night scrolling, the same emotional reaction, the same habit you thought you had already outgrown. That creates a strange question. If your brain can learn, why does it keep learning the wrong thing? Most people answer that question with willpower. They assume the problem is weak discipline, weak motivation, weak character. But there is a more interesting explanation, and it has less to do with character and more to do with loops. Because old patterns usually do not stay alive by accident. They stay alive because the brain is quietly reinforcing them again and again. And again, that is the hidden part. You notice the behavior, but you often do not notice the loop that keeps teaching the behavior to come back. To understand that loop, we need to start with something simple. Your brain is always changing. That is what neuroplasticity means. It means the brain can change its wiring based on experience. When something is repeated, the related pathways can strengthen. When something is not used, those pathways can weaken. That sounds hopeful, and it is. But it also creates a problem, because the brain does not only learn what is good for you, it learns what gets repeated. That includes useful things, reading, practicing, learning a language, building a skill. But it also includes less useful things, avoiding discomfort, checking your phone when bored, worrying when uncertain, shutting down when stressed, doubting yourself before action. So now we have the first reveal. Old patterns are often not random. They are trained. The next question is obvious. If a pattern is trained, what exactly is doing the training? This is where the hidden loop comes in. A very simple version looks like this. Something triggers you, you do something in response. That response gives your brain some kind of reward. Then the brain remembers the sequence. Later, when the trigger appears again, the brain suggests the same response. That is how loops are built. The word reward can be misleading here, because reward does not always mean pleasure. Sometimes reward means relief. Sometimes it means certainty. Sometimes it means escape. Sometimes it just means the uncomfortable feeling went down for a moment. That matters a lot. Because many old patterns survive not because they feel amazing, but because they work in the short term. Imagine you feel anxious, you start worrying. Worrying feels unpleasant, but it can create a strange sense of control. It makes you feel like you are doing something. So even though worry is uncomfortable, your brain may still learn that worry helps you respond to uncertainty. Now the loop is stronger. Uncertainty appears. Worry starts faster, or imagine boredom. You check your phone. For a moment, the boredom disappears. That tiny shift matters. Your brain tags the behavior. Boredom happened. Phone checking changed the state. Remember that. Or imagine stress. You avoid the task. The stress drops for a moment. That drop feels like relief. And relief is powerful. So the brain learns something dangerous but efficient. Stress appears. Avoidance helps. Repeat next time. This is the mechanism underneath many stubborn patterns. The brain is not just storing a memory. It is storing a procedure, a sequence. A root, trigger, response, relief or reward, repeat. And every time that root runs, the pathway gets a little easier to activate. That is where neuroplasticity enters the story. Repeated use strengthens the root. The brain becomes more efficient at running it. Over time, less effort is needed. Less thought is needed. Eventually, the pattern begins to feel natural. Here is where things get more interesting. The loop does not just reinforce the behavior. It also reinforces prediction. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what will happen next. When a certain trigger has repeatedly been followed by a certain response, the brain starts expecting that response. So now the old pattern is not just a habit. It is part of the brain's forecast. That means the loop is doing two jobs at once. It is rewarding the behavior, and it is making the behavior more expected in the future. That is why old patterns can feel like they just happen. They often feel automatic because the brain has stopped treating them like fresh decisions. It treats them like known routes. This is the deeper rule. The hidden loop reinforces old patterns by combining three things: a cue, a response, and a short-term reward or relief that teaches the brain to run the same route again. When that happens repeatedly, the route becomes stronger, faster, and more automatic. Now a lot of behaviors that seem very different start to look structurally similar: procrastination, phone checking, emotional eating, overthinking, self-criticism, avoidance, people-pleasing. On the surface, they look like different problems. Underneath, many of them are running the same kind of logic. A state appears, a behavior changes that state. The brain learns the sequence. Repeat. This also explains why bad advice often fails. Telling yourself just stop usually targets the behavior, but not the loop. If the loop is still intact, the trigger is still there, the reward relationship is still there, the learned prediction is still there. So the system rebuilds the behavior. That is why old patterns often return when life gets hard, when you are tired, stressed, overloaded, or emotionally flooded. The brain tends to rely more on familiar pathways. Flexible control drops. Better trained routes take over. That is not because stress creates a brand new personality. It is because stress reveals which pathways were already strongest. And now the practical question becomes much more precise. How do you weaken an old loop? First, you have to see it, not just the behavior. The whole loop. What triggered it? What did you do? What changed afterward? What reward did the brain receive? Second, you need to understand the real reward. This is where people often get stuck. They say, I do not even enjoy this. But the loop may not be about enjoyment. It may be about temporary relief, or emotional numbing, or certainty, or distraction, or a break from discomfort. Third, if you want the brain to stop reinforcing the old pattern, the new response has to compete at the level of function. In other words, the question is not only, what should I stop doing? The better question is, what else could meet the same need? If stress leads to avoidance because avoidance gives relief, a replacement behavior has to give the nervous system some other workable form of relief. If boredom leads to scrolling because scrolling gives stimulation, a replacement has to address stimulation. If uncertainty leads to overthinking because overthinking feels like control, a replacement has to address the need for control or steadiness. Fourth, repetition still matters. A lot, because insight alone does not rewire a pattern, repetition does. Focused repetition does. You can understand a loop perfectly, and still fall back into it, if the new pathway has not been practiced enough. That is why people sometimes confuse awareness with change. Awareness is the beginning, not the finish. The new route has to be repeated often enough that the brain starts learning. This is a real option, this works too. This can become a route. And this leads to a major shift in perspective. Most people assume old patterns stay alive because they secretly want them, but that is often too simple. A more accurate explanation is this. Old patterns stay alive because the brain has been trained to expect them, reward them, and run them efficiently. That is a very different model. It means relapse is not always proof of weak character. It may be evidence that the old loop is still better learned than the new one. It means repeated worry is not just thinking too much. It can be a reinforced mental habit loop. It means avoidance is not always laziness. It can be a short-term relief strategy the brain has learned to protect. And it means change becomes easier to think about. Because now the goal is not to fight yourself in a vague way. The goal is to identify the loop, interrupt the reward relationship, and train a more useful alternative. Once you see the hidden loop, old patterns become less mysterious. You stop asking only, why do I keep doing this? And you start asking, what is this pattern rewarding? That question is powerful, because it points to the actual teaching signal. And once you find the teaching signal, you can begin to change what the brain learns from repetition. So the hidden loop that reinforces old patterns is not magic. It is not fate. And it is not proof that change is impossible. It is a learning system. A very efficient one. And like any learning system, it can be understood. But that brings us to the next mystery. If old patterns are strengthened by cues, rewards, and repetition, how do those patterns eventually stop feeling like choices and start feeling automatic? How does a repeated behavior become a habit? That is what we will explore in the next video. If you want more clear, structured psychology and neuroscience, subscribe to Mind Mechanics. And I'll see you in the next one.